The story begins in the kingdom of Royalus. In this world, monsters began to appear 100 years ago, and they destroyed the world along with miasma. Only a saint could heal the desecrated land and protect people from the threat of monsters. Only the prayers of the saints in the barrier could save the people. In the city, a bard sang a song about the time when, for 80 long years, the gods abandoned the land due to the absence of a saint, and now, thanks to the traveling saint Lady Mura, unprecedented peace has come. Meanwhile, rumors circulated in the city that Prince Arthur and Lady Myra were engaged, but no one was sure, and since a festive ceremony was to be held to mark Myra's nearly 1 year stay in the country, people thought it would be announced there. About the one just mentioned, the scene shifted to Mura. One of her maids approached and informed her that breakfast was ready. Myra thanked her and agreed to follow her. As they walked together through the corridors, she shared with her maid that although the purification was going smoothly, the barrier was also in excellent condition. She still felt that the number of monsters was increasing every day and wanted to do everything to calm the people. The maid understood her feelings and said that this was exactly why her engagement to the prince would be joyful news for the residents of this city. At that moment, several guards appeared before them, and Prince Arthur himself came to see her. She bowed and politely greeted the prince. However, suddenly the prince hit her and pushed her back. The maid quickly came to her aid and asked the prince what all this meant and why he was doing this. The prince reminded her that she should not speak to him so casually, and in a moment they found themselves. All the guards pointed their swords at them. He called Myra a false saint and told her that after receiving testimony from the high priest himself, it was proven that her powers were considered false. The maid tried to convince him that this could not be true because many people had seen her powers with their own eyes, including him. But the prince simply did not care and only recently remembered this. They discovered the true saint who was born in this country, and Myra had only been pretending all this time. However, the time had come to put an end to her antics, and he decided that she must be expelled immediately. Myra simply asked him if this was the king's order, and the prince was silent for a moment. He then said that his father was being transported now, and so, while this lasted, he acted as regent. So these were the words of the king himself, and he told her that she should be grateful because he spared her and did not expel her from this country. Having nothing to answer, Myra simply nodded and left together with the maid. At night, many people from the city gathered under her house. Everyone was announced that Saint Myra had taken upon herself the powers of the true Saint Mariel of their country. Therefore, for this crime, pretending to be a saint, it was decided to expel her from the country. Moreover, it was revealed that the high priest conspired with Myra and was her accomplice. He was to be immediately stripped of the priesthood and imprisoned. When Myra was descending the stairs, people just stood amazed, seeing her, and could not understand why this was happening to her. They did not know how to treat her and wanted to hear from her herself. She had indeed deceived them all this time. At first, they doubted whether she was guilty because they believed her. But seeing that she said nothing in response, they began to believe it was true and turned against her. They called her a fake and said she was having fun while deceiving everyone. While Toil tried to calm her down, one of them picked up a stone and was about to throw it at her, but another man stopped him and insisted that they must not do that because it would bring a curse upon them. But Myra suddenly turned around, and everyone was frightened because they did not know what she would do next. However, she simply bowed like a true lady and wished everyone a good day. When she and Tull finally left the city, Tull asked her why she did not resist, because she also knew that it was too harsh a punishment, but Myra replied that it was pointless because they had already decided from the beginning and, it seemed, did not want to listen. Tull noted that the citizens would definitely have listened to what she had to say. None of them knew that she was actually the third princess of the Kingdom of Addis, Princess Myra. In the flashback, it is seen that she personally asked her for this. She told her family that instead of remaining Princess Myra of Eddas, she wanted to go out into the wide world as a wandering saint, and at first her mother was against it because she was only 15, and sent her daughters so far away without any support. She was sure that many bad people would come after her, but still, after numerous requests, she finally agreed. When the day of Myra's departure came, her mother explained that the role of a saint was not limited to one task. Later in Hordeless, a new saint is to be born for the future, who is to become one that lives among people and becomes part of their lives. Myra listened to her and promised to use the power of the saint to help bring peace to this world. Thus she met the king and his son, Prince Arthur, who gladly accepted her. Only now did he begin to show his true face. Returning to the present, she had a wonderful time. She also knew that she could prove herself at any time, because she only needed to use her powers in front of everyone. However, even if she proved it to the people, she also knew that the prince simply would not acknowledge her presence, and if she resisted, it would hurt his pride and he might resort to violence. If that happened, only the soldiers who were simply following orders would suffer. At the same time, she also felt bad about the whole situation. Although she rarely saw Prince Arthur face to face, he was always kind and attentive to her, and she decided in her heart that someday she would reveal her true identity to him and live as the saint of this country. But now everything changed because of what he did to her. They could no longer stay here, so they decided to return to her home, to Ada. Now that a new saint and waiterless have been born, she did not need to maintain the barrier because it would interfere with her using her power. Moreover, now that she was no longer needed there, she used her magic and removed the barrier she had placed around the city. After that, they decided to set off immediately because the road to the Addis border would be long. But first, they had to make some preparations in the nearest town. He advised everyone to go to the Adventurers Guild and find someone there to protect them from monsters and bandits. They needed to hire someone who could accompany them because from now on, the path was to become a wasteland, so he no longer wasted time. Mirror said goodbye to that city and set off. Later, when they came out of the forest, they finally saw the next city. Their destination was the border with Ada's, and they were already approaching Tom Trace. What town was near the capital, Voideless? When they reached the city, they went to the hotel and Tool approached her. He gave her a few new things and asked her to change clothes because it was time to go to the guild. When they came to the guild, there were many men there, and as soon as she arrived, everyone began to look at her as if they knew who she was. Meanwhile, Toil approached the receptionist and asked if she still remembered her previous request. The receptionist confirmed that she remembered her request to accompany her to the border of the Kingdom of Addis and informed them that in the last few days, requests for escort had suddenly increased. She knew a person who could help them both, but he was currently elsewhere and would return only tomorrow. Myra became a little worried because other men were approaching ominously and asking if she was really in such a hurry, and if so, he offered to escort her for free. However, Mura just smiled at them and told him that she could wait until tomorrow because she was not in a hurry at all. She began to move away from them, and the man ran after her, asking why she was distancing herself from them. But then she used her magic, sharply closed the door behind her, and he hit the door face first. And he and his friends began to think about what had just happened. When they left the guild, Myra was no longer there, and they lost sight of her. Returning to the room after seeing how much the order had changed in just one city, they realized it was best to leave the territory of Aridalis as soon as possible. Many people had already heard about that faint incident, and if they stayed there too long now, no one knew who might come for them and what would happen to them. Mura asked her how she paid for the hotel and the clothes she bought for her, because she thought that she had arrived without money, like herself, since she had just left the capital. Toil told her that when she was leaving Ada, her mother, Lady Ada, entrusted her with some precious metals. She told her to use this money as a fund for trips in case of unforeseen situations, but she never thought she would have to use it. Myra was glad to hear how much her mother cared about her, and she wanted to know what her brother would say about it. She had only recently informed him about the engagement, and now suddenly she was expelled from this country. Others said that such an act would not be forgiven, because it would not be allowed not only by King Lloyd, but also by Rhodalis, her mother Lady Ada, and both her sisters. The citizens, and even she herself, were not going to accept this. She also told her that in the guild, while they were reviewing requests, she heard a detailed rumor about this new true saint. Her name was Meryl, the honored daughter of the County of Dala. She was also 16, like Myra. She had golden hair and blue eyes, and she barely felt her powers, involuntarily performing miracles that supported the country, but then there appeared rigged trials that infringed on her honor and interrupted her efforts. This is what they said about Myra, and it seems many people have already started to believe it. However, Myra could not understand why this became known only now, and she replied that they say Mary L. was the orphan of the Count's brother. 10 years ago, monsters attacked the Count's domain. The brother was killed, and his child disappeared. After that, the Count was able to find the child of his deceased brother, who ended up in an orphanage, and it was then that her power began to manifest. Mira recalled that 10 years ago was the same period when the southern kingdom of Lead Eye was destroyed. Perhaps due to the guarantee of a high price, everything was planned in advance, but then everything changed. Everyone reminded her that the heir could not do that much, and this country had long been preparing for betrayal, so she told Myra that she no longer needed to burden herself for the sake of this country. Myra simply smiled, agreed with her, and decided to leave everything else to her brother. Then they went to rest to get a good sleep before the long journey. Later at night, Myra woke up. She thought that within her barrier, other saintesses would not be able to properly manifest their powers. This even included her mother and sisters, who were her blood relatives. She still did not know whether it was due to her own inexperience or incompatibility. Looking out the window, she felt as if she had found herself in a completely different world in just one day. Thinking about that event 10 years ago, she recalled that there was also a saint in the kingdom of Lide, but the kingdom was destroyed overnight, and because of this, numerous refugees and monsters ended up in neighboring countries. There were about 10 more days until her barrier completely lost its power, and she was a little worried because when the barrier disappeared and Muriel could not overcome the monster, the whole country would be doomed. Although there was no place for her here, she doubted that she really could do nothing there. The next morning, they left the hotel and saw that the mirrors were still rusty. She would apologize to her for providing such bad accommodation. Myra assured that it was not a problem, and also asked not to call her princess until they returned, to which she agreed. When they later came to the guild, the receptionist informed them that their escort had also returned. She quietly assured them that there was no need to worry because this person was very different from others and would not make strange demands. The man who was supposed to escort them home was sitting right there, and his name was Roll. Later, 2 ladies followed Roll. He led them into a secluded alley, then looked at them. They said that a noble girl with problems was the perfect prey. Both were stunned and instantly became alert, ready to fight to protect the young princess, but Raoul asked her to calm down and explained that this is exactly what most of the hound people would think when they see them. He was not going to reveal their names to anyone, but it was clear that their dirty cloak, which did not match the clean outfit, would definitely attract attention. He simply told them that if they wanted to avoid trouble with scoundrels until the border, they should not stray from him, and they moved forward. Then he led them to the state store, where many adventurers bought equipment before a journey. It was the perfect opportunity when they could buy everything they wanted because it was no longer leaking. He bought Myra a cloak, and although she liked it, it had cat ears and she considered it very childish, but Raoul told her that it suited her very well. As for Chul, he asked her if she was trying to look like she was swimming with a sword, and she replied that it was just part of her imitation. Meanwhile, Myra was looking in the mirror. She still did not like the cat hood and was fixing her hair when Raoul advised her to keep the hood up because her silver hair would stand out too much. She agreed that he was right and had never thought about it before, so she used one of her spells and changed her hair color. Raoul was very surprised because he had never seen anyone do that with magic, and Myra in her mind realized that she could not let him find out who she really was. She just smiled and said that it was one of the uses of her magic. He looked at her suspiciously and said that it should be quite comfortable. Putting that aside, he informed them that it usually takes at least 10 days, up to 2 weeks, to walk to the border of Ida. However, the roads ahead had become a bit bad due to recent bad weather, so they might need a little more time. Therefore, he advised him to choose food that keeps well to lighten their load. So when they finished preparing, they decided to finally set off. Later on the way, Myra thanked him for everything he had done for them. She admitted that all of this was new to her, and he, in turn, did not pay attention to her feelings and simply said that he did it because her payment was fair. Suddenly, he asked her if this happened rarely. She did not know what he was talking about. He noted that it was the first time he had seen such a color of sunset. Speaking of colors, she noticed his red hair and tan skin. She knew where such people usually were and asked him if he was from the kingdom of Lida. He was silent for a moment, then replied that he already knew who she was, a saint who turned out to be fake and was now fleeing to the village. Myra pretended to be foolish and did not admit that everyone was talking about her, said that she had also heard these rumors, but since the false saint was expelled and even the high priest confirmed it, the true saint should be accepted immediately. Roll noted that chaos often arises around saints because someone can incite their power, or the saint themselves sometimes uses it with bad intentions. But in any case, the land where that chaos arises usually declines. The curse of the banished knight out of revenge or anger can bring disaster. But even with all this, wise people simply fled quickly. In short, responding to her argument, he believed that the arrival of the true saint guaranteed nothing, because even the righteousness of the saint himself and the believers was not absolute. It was quite possible that this country would also be destroyed, Myra simply could not find words. As they went further, they came across a dead end where a group of people was also standing. It turned out that heavy rains had softened the ground ahead, so although it was possible to pass in places, it was risky, and full restoration would take months. Many people there decided simply to turn back and take another route. Myra and the group approached a little closer to plan the next steps and inform everyone that it was still possible to bypass on foot, but as the man said earlier, it was dangerous because the terrain could still collapse. The mountain trail was treacherous, and the weather there was often unpredictable, so it was dangerous again. Since they had almost no choice, Myra suggested taking the most reliable option and simply hiding in this city until the roads were restored. This was not a problem for Raoul because he would only receive an additional reward for extended duty. After that, he left the room, and Tull also suggested that they primarily avoid unpredictable problems. Because even if their communication is cut off, Roulette will simply send someone to look for her. There was also the possibility that they would join her, but Miura said she was convinced that people should not fight in this world. She was confident that sooner or later Waitalus would not be able to avoid scrutiny because of this incident, but her brother would likely restrain his anger and try to find a compromise. In the turbulent future, the residents of Loydales were still not confident in their own strength. So even if she was not in a hurry, she was confident that everything would work out. Yet she no longer thought that she should stay there. She feared that if during their delay rumors about her exile spread even more, they could be twisted and told to others in a hostile way. When that happens, she was not sure if her brother would be able to maintain calm and clarity of thought even then. Therefore, she needed to quickly inform him that she was safe and did not want conflict. However, 2L noted that all this happened as a result of Loydal's actions. He told her that she must become the saint who will live for the people, and by whom the people will live until the true saint is born. Myra simply said that she had sworn to her mother to be the kind of saint who would not ignore others just because she lost her place. When she said this, Ro was just outside her room door and was listening to everything. Moreover, they had her brother, who would surely search all her places if something happened to her. Oak could not argue with her because he felt that she would say so. Returning to the topic, she told her that there was another route mostly used by lumberjacks. It was a fairly gentle bypass. And although it would take him a little time, it was still faster than waiting for months until the landslide was cleared. Myra felt a little guilty because she realized that Toil could easily cross that mountain if she did not accompany him. But 2L did not think so at all and said that she had been her private escort almost all her life, so she was taught that way. However, Mura insisted that she would take the bypass together with Raoul, and Toil should lead along the mountain path. To deliver the message to her brother, she relied on her to part ways here and pass it on. She decided to go talk to Raoul and tell him all about it, and he, by the way, was still standing just outside her door, listening and thinking that all this would be included in his fee. The next morning, having left the forest, she gave Chul a letter for her brother because he was going to send this message by a guild courier from the other side of the mountain. Regarding this route, there were adventurers and travelers who were going the same way, so it was easy to blend in with them and reduce the danger. Before leaving, Muir apologized to Twill because she understood well that she was the one taking the greatest risk with this plan. In response, she simply hugged her and said that since childhood, since they met, she had never abandoned her and would not do so now. And so she finally got her way and left. Roll called Tamira and asked why she trusted him so much, agreeing to go alone with him through this forest. With a smile, she simply replied that there was indeed kindness in him, and he was left speechless. At that moment, he realized that she really was an extraordinary girl. When they both walked through the forest, they reached a place from where the lumberjack's cabin was visible. And this marked the boundary where people had cleared the land to pass through the mountains and forests. The path was difficult, and he asked her if she was ready for it. She already looked exhausted and was not even walking straight. She just wanted to ease their way through Hillary. Such places were clearly not familiar to her, and the strain on her legs and lungs became very strong. Roll told her about all the route options from there, and with sufficient rest, they could set up camp twice in 3 days. They could take a longer road with fearsome drops, or simply return to the city to replenish supplies. The final decision was hers, and she made it after hearing all this. She promised to do her best, but although he praised her for her cheerfulness and determination, he asked her not to overexert herself and took her hand to help. Later in the evening, they made a campfire to eat and spend the night. He also told her that once they passed the square, the entire path would be downhill, and it would be the same type of route she had wanted before. However, he warned her that the descent could throw her off balance, so it was not a simple walk. He also said they should prepare for encounters with monsters. The farther they were from the capital's barrier, the greater the likelihood of monster attacks became. Moreover, although travelers and soldiers can fight monsters, they cannot cleanse dead bodies like a saint. Myra simply remained silent and finished eating. Later, while she was resting, Roll looked at her and remembered that she had said earlier that he was naturally very kind. It turned out that the real saint was the one who destroyed his country, and looking at her with a knife in his hand, he loudly said that he was not who she thought he was. Then we are shown a short flashback with him a few days ago. And there was a great commotion in the guild because of the quest. The woman asked for a little adventure to help her, and 3 men appeared before her and said that she could leave it to them. They told her everything about themselves and the bride, how they always take responsibility for everything that happens to their client. Meanwhile, Roll had just approached the reception to ask if there was a new task for him. She was very happy when she saw him because she had the perfect request that only he could fulfill. It was about escorting migrants who were heading to the border of the kingdom of Idi. He asked her why she said that only he could do it. She replied that the guild had an obligation to treat its clients well, but they usually lacked staff. Moreover, this client did not look like just a naive girl who accidentally came in, and she really relied on the guild due to circumstances. If that were the case, she could not have entrusted this task to those 3 idiots who constantly show off. Roll hesitated a little, then told her to inform the clients to wait a day, because he really wanted to find out the truth about the rumor that Saint Loitek was fake, and therefore, he wanted to learn more about it, and suggested that these 2 clients might be fake saints and Turaj. She agreed to pass this on, but added that they really did not know their schedule, and if they were truly in a hurry, they could find someone else with connections and leave the city. However, he was not worried at all, and said it would be unwise to go with just anyone, so he knew they would wait. With that, he left the guild, and had just stepped outside. 3 men approached her and asked what she had been talking about with Roll, and if she had any other interesting tasks for them. Meanwhile, when Roll left the guild, there was also a great commotion outside, and everyone was talking about the rumors that Myra was considered a fake saint. And she was already expelled in the morning by Prince Arthur. Most cursed Mura and said they would never forgive her for pretending to be a saint among all people. However, there were those who said that something seemed off. It seems everyone knew this rumor, but no one knew where it came from. But none of them stopped at that, and all supported the prince and the new true Saint Meryl. When Raoul passed by them, he noticed that among the people there was not so much surprise or anger as anxiety, because the false saint could easily imitate powers, and in this world where everyone fights, it was hard to say what that fraud would do now that he was expelled from this land. At the same time, looking around, he knew that it was all the same, and whatever happened, this country was cursed. A vivid example, several men were chasing a woman to harm her. Then he quickly ran up and knocked them all down, saving the women. She thanked him and offered to pay as much as he wanted if he would become her guardian. However, he shouted at her and said that she should not rely on others so easily. He agreed to take her to a safe place, but advised her to choose allies more wisely. He had already seen in his thoughts that without the saint, the world would not last long, because only she could stop the monsters that were growing, and although many people doubted whether she truly fulfilled her duty, in reality she preserved peace. The next day, when he finally met with the client, he immediately saw Murat. Although she tried to disguise herself, he immediately recognized her, Princess Myra from the kingdom of Ithas, and she was a true saint. Returning to the present time, the next morning they reached a small town where they decided to stay for a day. He suggested eating before sunset, and tomorrow before departure to replenish supplies. She, on the other hand, simply wondered whether Chul had safely crossed the mountain. And she was already on the way to the next city. As they walked the streets, Raul noticed several men and hooligans who looked at them suspiciously. He became alert and told Myra to step aside for a moment. She asked if everything was all right, and he simply replied that he would be back soon. He went ahead and left her alone, and she was just thinking how nice it was to finally see Raul eating in peace. After 3 days in the mountains, she knew he must be tired from night watch and tending the fire. Those men and thugs were watching her from afar, and Raul was carefully watching them. They made their move, approached her, and surrounded her from all sides and they asked her if she was really Myra. They removed the hood and it turned out that they had accidentally grabbed a completely different person. Her hair was different, not silver, and they realized that this was not Mura. Meanwhile, Raul grabbed Muraz by the hand and said that the plans had changed, and instead of spending the night in the city, they were returning to the mountains and going even deeper until they disappeared from the city's sight. He recognized the badge on their backs and understood that they were soldiers of Il Dialos. It seemed they were looking for the fake Saint Mura. And although he did not know their intentions, from what they were doing, it was clear that they were checking the faces of all women of similar build. Myra was confused and did not understand how they had gotten here at all, since the road was blocked by a landslide, and besides, the Ural territory was supposed to be on the capital. He noticed tracks that they had probably rushed along the lower path, the one they had not taken, and also saw a mountain breed horse tied on the outskirts, which confirmed their good preparation. So they would have to spend another night on the march, and he suggested first moving further away, otherwise they would be noticed when they lit a fire. But then she stopped him and asked if he was also looking for the fake sand. Raul admitted to her that he had actually known this from the very beginning. She was the true Saint Mura of the kingdom of Idis, not the fake saint as everyone called her. It turned out that Raul did not hate all the saints. The world of robbery and violence where he was thrown was very frightening for a weak and naive boy. He had nothing to rely on, so he just tried to survive and achieved nothing. He always wanted someone to save him, especially when he faced monsters. He could only think that he should not have let go of his brother's hand then. If he had done so, he would not have ended up alone in this world. Because of that small act, he had no father, no mother, no brother, no native city. He wanted to believe in the saints, because he knew he no longer had the strength to trust himself. That evening, when Myra was resting before him, he still thought that she was one of the reasons he ended up in this country, because she was a true saint, even when she was considered a false saint. She was so confident in him that she could trust and rest calmly, even though she had just met him, because she was completely sure that she could trust others. And at that moment, he finally remembered why he was able to recognize her at first sight when they met, long ago in his homeland Lidai. Before that, some saint appeared who destroyed everything. The former King Itas personally led the army to help the kingdom of Lidai, which fought against monster attacks. Roll also wanted to thank him, but was so overwhelmed by his presence that all he could do was hide behind the brother who was talking to him, with dignity as a member of the royal family Lida. Then the king gently held the girl. It was Myra, and although he looked at her only for a moment, her image was etched into his memory. And so returning to the present, he apologized to her for pretending all this time as if he did not know who she was. Myra, on the other hand, was very embarrassed and could not even look him in the eyes because she was ashamed that she lied, even though he already knew who she was, and she realized how foolish and humiliating it looked. So she apologized to him and explained that she had to hide her identity. She officially introduced herself to him as the third princess of the kingdom of Idis, and he was glad to hear it, after which they decided to start over and this time do it properly. He only thought that if he managed to deliver her alive to the border, someday he could repay that time and maybe finally lift his head a little. Then a flashback was shown, and the scene moved to the royal palace, where the king was telling all the nobles in the room about the last saint who was born about 80 years ago in their land, without hesitation. Although she then married the king's younger brother, she suffered greatly because her power did not change. They were either saints or minimalists and could only make simple talismans. Unlike the saint from the noble family who was born earlier, she grew up in an orphanage, and because of this faced harsh comparison and discrimination. Even the then king hesitated to recognize her as a saint, so they never had children. Many years have passed since a saint was born in this Loyalist, and many people in the countries believed it was a punishment for oppressing the last saint. This nation was also called cursed, abandoned by the gods. The king recently heard that the healing saint would soon travel to different lands, and declared that he intended to ask her to stay in this land so that eventually his son Arthur was able to establish strong relations with her. The king simply wanted his people to move together toward a better future. A future in which the foolish deeds of the past, committed by the leaders and people of this nation, could be erased, truly giving it hope. Arthur smiled and agreed with his father, but as soon as he returned to his room, he expressed his true feelings. He was annoyed by the whole idea, because to him, the saint was just a person who had just received special powers, and his father worshipped them as if they were a god. Moreover, to believe that all this happened because of events 8 years ago, and to call it a curse seemed very absurd to him. Almost everyone thought the same, but the king and the people were simply pathetic, and he believed that this was the real curse. So he decided to take matters into his own hands and properly manage this saint. That is why he always behaved kindly in front of Mura, stayed close to her, and showed her his kingdom. He still could not come to terms with the fact that just because she was a saint, she was treated like a queen, although she had no home or family. His father gave all these orders, and among them was that he had to take her by the hand and acknowledge her as his wife. Just the thought of that possibility made him laugh. So over time one day, he finally learned from one of his men that they had found a saint who, although she was not yet officially recognized, she had just been taken from the orphanage to the count's estate. Her name was Meryl, and she was a mayor. The man planned to go there together with the high priest and a few others to personally conduct a thorough investigation, because he heard that she was of noble origin but had lost her parents. Arthur allowed him to do this, told him not to tell anyone about it now, and to report all the details of the investigation to him. This was exactly what he was waiting for, so he began to laugh at the whole situation because of how funny it was, and they found a saint who was actually also a nobleman. But he restrained his excitement, realizing that he had to act carefully because there were still many uncertainties, and he needed to precisely fit this into his scenario. He wanted to be the center of everything, the one who gives people hope. And for this to happen, he decided to spread rumors so that when the time came, he could make this thing as grand as possible. He began by distorting this information and spreading it among the knights, so they became completely confused and did not know what to do with it. Instead, he planned to further inflame suspicions, because then, as soon as the structure of the conflict is established, Neuro will lose all her influence, and the only one who will support her will be the servant she brought with her when she came to this country. As for politics, he also did not need to worry, because his father's health was deteriorating. He was increasingly controlling affairs, and he was close to ascending to power, as he even knew the prime minister and was confident that he would not stand in his way. Regarding the temple, he visited the high priest, who, after the investigation, he confirmed that they were right. For the first time in 80 years, a saint was born in this country, and he hoped that she would bless the entire nation. Arthur was glad to hear this, and since that was the case, he ordered the chief priest to say that Myro was a false saint and a criminal who deceived their nation by taking Myro's position. The high priest was shocked and said that he could not lie, as if he was not ready to cooperate. He ordered his guards to seize the high priest. They immediately carried out the order. And the priest asked them if they understood what they were doing, because they had no right to act so recklessly, since the king Loidalas himself had appointed him to this position. However, Arthur just smiled and told him that now he was performing the duties of the king, so his words had become the words of the king. When the guards were leading away the high priest, Arthur reassured his people that they did not need to worry about the successor, because he had already found someone who, although lower in rank, she was from a flawless, noble family, worthy of bearing the name of the high priest. Moreover, he did not want people to see the humiliation of the former high priest, so he decided to make it so that even with loud shouting, his voice would not reach the people. Until he wanted them to hear his voice, his plan was finally completed. The people who felt betrayed by the false saint were grieving and angry, and Arthur and Mariel, who looked deceived, evoked sympathy, and everyone united to serve the king of the new era. He planned to eliminate all unnecessary elements that could hinder his vision. Obviously among them were Myra and Germaid. And he wanted everything to belong only to him. 3 days had passed since Myra was expelled from the country, and one day people burst into Mariel's room, although she was surrounded by servants. Using them as literally slaves, she wished him good morning, and instead he shouted at her and asked what she was doing, because it was already the 3rd day. She proudly told him that she was currently arranging a tea party, and after that, today in the afternoon, they would also have a nap party. He asked her why she was still hiding from people and just sitting in this temple, changing clothes, eating, and indulging herself, although she had already prepared a teacher. Not only that, she maintained so many caregivers, a private chef, and a court jester. She even appointed herself a coordinator for the house. He reminded her that first she needed to fulfill the duties of a saint, not deal with all these renovations in the house. However, she said that life in the temple also means getting along with the priestess. She learned so much about what everyone loves, about flowers, colors, tea flavors, and secret places where snacks are hidden. Some said that a certain Donores would grant their wishes if they stroked his chin. Arthur began to lose patience with her and reminded her once again that her job in this city was primarily to calm people down. He needed the presence of both to inspire people and help them forget their fears. This was only the first step, but they wanted everyone to accept them, so he told her to prepare for a quick appearance. She laughed and assured him that there was no need to worry because she had already figured out how to greet everyone. She dreamed of a big stage with her cute photograph in the background, where she could finally debut and captivate people. Arthur warned her that if she gets too excited, he will spank her. Leaving her room, he could not believe that only 3 days had passed, and his plan was already falling apart. Having just driven out Myra, he captivated everyone with a sincere speech, and some even fainted, but judging by how everything was going now, he feared that this enthusiasm would soon fade. The priest suggested that this might be a reaction because she had lived in the shelter for too long. He had heard that she was quite a spoiled child, and the fact that she did not show herself to people could be explained by fatigue from travel and a change of environment. But Arthur was not too sure about this, because at first she showed no signs of noble upbringing at all, and even the fake saint who wandered everywhere had much more dignity than she did. He accused the priest and asked what he was doing, because the priest was given a position to establish communication and control in the temple, and he was not supposed to let her act on her own. In response, he simply apologized and said he had been too busy returning all the priests to service. The distance was completely different than in the times of Miras, and when he realized this, she had already convinced them. Half of them were manipulated on the day of her arrival, and she took the entire group under control in just one day. Hearing this, Arthur decided to investigate again and ordered his men to conduct a sudden inspection at the shelter where Meryl was. Therefore, he decided that the mentors should be even closer to her and adjust her rest habits. But then the priest informed him that there was actually another problem concerning her. The monsters surrounding the royal capital seemed to lurk behind the castle walls and waited for prey to attack. It had spread widely among the people, and adventurers and merchants could no longer easily get there. Arthur assured him that the increase in the number of monsters was not a surprise to him and that he had already ordered to strengthen the patrols. Yet everything boiled down to Saint's barrier. The priest also believed that the change in the monsters' movements probably happened because Myra removed her barrier from the capital when she was expelled, but her power was so great that even the remnants of the barrier still restrained these monsters. But in the end, all of this was just a supposition, because the priests could not use the power of the saints and only guessed, relying on past experience. Arthur then asked him how long, in his opinion, after effects would last, and the priest said no more than 10 days. Because of this, Mariel now had to show her strength even more to repel the monsters instead of Myra. And he began to think about giving that spoiled idiot a kick. Later, he took her to the prayer hall, which was to become her main workplace, but she was still sulking and said she did not want to work in such an old and scary place where even the flowers were not pretty. He forced her to sit down and told her what she had to do. Her task as a saint was to immediately deploy the barrier, and he forbade all priests from entering there so they would not be distracted. But to make her happy, he brought her favorite pillow, slippers, and an aromatherapy set. After all that was said, he asked her to do it right now. She, on the other hand, was busy with a tea party she had promised to the other priests. He told her directly to cancel it and focus on the barrier. She replied that some of them could not calm down without her whispering voice. Arthur did not care, and he ordered her again to just do it. She finally agreed to set up the barrier, and he watched with interest how she would handle it. She nervously smiled and asked to explain how it was possible to cover the whole city with a barrier from that place, and this completely puzzled them both. Later, Arthur panicked when his butler informed him that King Idas himself had come to visit him and was currently waiting for him in the VIP room. Arthur asked him why he hadn't first asked whether to even let him into the castle. And the butler replied that it was an agreement between Kings Royla and Idas that they allow each other to visit anytime without explanations. It was the first time Arthur had ever heard about such an arrangement. Then Meryl approached him and wished him good morning. She had heard that the king from that crazy country called Idas had also visited them. She guessed that he probably knew everything about the saints, because they said there were many, and that fascinated her since she could learn secrets of enhancements or something similar from him. She also wanted to listen to the story. Meanwhile, Arthur was starting to get very annoyed with her because he saw that she was so relaxed, even though she could do nothing. However, he truly admired her eagerness to learn and thought it wouldn't be so bad to present a real saint to the king for future plans. He allowed her to join him in the VIP room, but made it clear that she could only observe attentively and act according to his instructions. She was delighted and agreed. When they left the VIP room, Arthur couldn't help but wonder why so many surprises had happened to him since he met Mariel. But one thing had been bothering him for some time, and he could not understand what the anxious feeling in his heart was when he finally found himself face to face with the king of Idas. The king was glad to see that he had finally come to meet him. He introduced himself as Reloid, king of Idas. Arthur responded with a greeting and recalled that the man before him was also known as the Silver Lion Reloid. He was a young king who now ruled the great nation of Idas instead of his late father. In battles with monsters, he raised his sword and went ahead, and his shining silver hair resembled a lion's mane. Arthur also introduced himself as the first Prince of Roids and explained that due to his father's illness, the king, he had come to the meeting in his place. He thought that although everyone said the king of Idas was fierce as a lion, judging by his appearance, he was hardly skilled with a sword anymore. Then the king said that since they were neighboring peoples, there was no need for many formalities, and he especially mentioned the burial. This confused Arthur a little, and he was also surprised that the king had already heard about him. Before moving on, he explained that the weapons and knights with him were just a precaution. And in fact, he was going to leave as soon as he finished his business here. Therefore, he assured them that he did not want to offend them and apologized if he scared anyone, and Arthur fully understood this and said it was normal to be prepared for anything. Moreover, he expressed regret that he could not receive him better and immediately got to the point. Arthur informed him that near the capital they had problems with monsters and asked the king to allow them to take necessary measures on his territory. If he could do that, he would be very grateful and would thank him for cooperating in destroying the monsters. The king valued his straightforwardness and agreed to help them. But then he got down to business and told him that he actually came there to look for two things. Confused, Arthur asked him what those could be, and the king first inquired how his father was feeling now. He heard that he had been bedridden for about a year, and that really worried him, because Cain Reiters had close ties with him and his country. Arthur thanked him for his concern and assured him that his father was receiving excellent medical care and his condition was actually stable. Reloid then recalled that about a year ago King Reiter made an important decision. He said that when they accepted the traveling saint, he would take on the duty of healing the land during her travels through the countries, and by this ended the help they had been receiving from neighboring countries since they lost the saint 8 years ago. During the year the saint was around, food supplies were replenished, threats from monsters decreased, public safety improved, and the economy truly flourished. The loss of support was more than compensated by what they gained, so they were able to move forward. Arthur agreed with everything that had just been said and explained that this was exactly why Merrill was now with them. But at that very moment, the king raised his hand as if signaling his knights. And suddenly a strange tension filled the room. He noticed that because of the decision the King Reuters made a year ago, he was very worried because he realized that he was simply using the saints, as the old kings did. Reload knew this because the king himself told him so, and even added that for this he might be cursed. Arthur did not believe in curses, and did not understand where he was even leading this conversation. He thought that if such a thing really existed, his father would definitely have told him as his successor, and also did not understand why his father never spoke about the pact with King Idas. Then something became clear to him, and he wondered why his father spoke about this with Reloid, and not with him, and more importantly, why he could come to them right now of all times. At that moment he began to piece together everything that had happened recently. It was known that Ithas had several saints, this pact between King Voidas and King Ithas. Finally, the saint who visited them a year ago also had gray hair, like King Reload, and he finally understood what was happening here. And he literally began to sweat from fear, trying to calm down. He told himself that it was impossible, and that she was just a wandering saint, who had nothing to do with this story at all, and nothing more. But then King Rolette simply smiled, and said that his intuition was really sharp. Thus it was confirmed that he was right, and Muriel did not know what was happening, and thought that the king was praising him, so she also began to say that the prince was truly extraordinary. He always put the interests of the entire kingdom first. He cared for his people and always wanted to help, so the whole kingdom was happy under his rule. Meanwhile, Arthur was also a bit confused because he did not know what she might say next, as he had ordered her to be silent and just follow him. But she did exactly what he was trying to avoid, and began to tell how that false saint pursued his own goals. He was completely stunned, and the interested king asked her who this false saint was, although they tried to stop her right there. She continued and told him that the false saint was a foolish fraud who had tousled her gray hair. She only stole from others and was a miserable puppet exposed by Arthur himself. Because of the false saint, Meryl was now weak, and she betrayed Arthur and everyone in this country. And finally she called Mura a cruel, dirty sinner who falsely claimed the role of a saint, thus a false saint. Arthur was still trying to make her stop talking, but it was already too late, and suddenly the room became cold. I looked at the king, and he coldly looked at them and asked her why she fell silent. Mariol completely froze in place, and the knights also began to look at them. Arthur was frightened and put his hand to his neck, as if afraid that his head would be cut off. While King Reload summoned him and asked him to describe what this false saint looked like. Lowering his head, he answered that she had gray hair. The king then asked him if she resembled a vile woman who wants to lure others and Arthur into a trap. Still trembling with fear of death, he replied that he did not mean that, but the king did not care what he meant. Because in the end, he himself, performing the duties of the king, gave the order to expel her. Indeed, I finally told him that a year ago that girl came to this kingdom incognito at the personal request of King Loidalus and served as a saint for the capital. But then, immediately after she informed him about the engagement to the prince, she was suddenly considered a false saint and shamefully expelled. So the main reason he came to visit them today was that he was actually looking for Sister Myra. As soon as he heard this, Arthur was stunned again. He kept repeating to himself that he was innocent and knew nothing, so he tried to come up with a way to shift all the blame onto someone else. And at that moment, one name came to his mind. He immediately blamed everything on Count Dialo and said that he was the one behind it, as he had been spreading slander about her throughout the kingdom. He was clearly nervous, but continued and said that he and all the others had been used by him, and this led to irreparable damage. But then the king quoted what Arthur had told his people when he began spreading rumors that she was a false saint, and how he wanted them to raise their voices to show. They heard that there was no place for her here, and forced her to understand the gravity of her sins. The king knew all this, and Arthur was even more shocked because now his second lie was also exposed, and Reload praised him that his very loyal subjects remembered everything he told them. But they were not going to help him, and the king looked him straight in the eyes with a threatening expression, causing him to wet himself. However, the king remained calm and said that his father's choice was very unwise. Reload had no desire to point out others' faults, but out of his father's mercy, he wanted to tell him one thing. He told Arthur that he was completely unfit for all this. As soon as he passed by him, he fell to his knees as if all his strength had drained out of him. He was very scared. Muriel was also still in shock, and before leaving, the king called her and reminded her that she was a saint, born in a country long left without a lineage. Therefore, the ability to overcome the miasma will appear only in the next generation. This meant that she had no power at all. After that, he left the room and found himself outside, where Arthur's butler and the priest were. Riley told him that he would formally discuss this later, and the butler asked him if he was already returning. He was given a welcoming reception, but the king turned around and said he was told that it was unnecessary because there was no point for him to stay there anymore. With each passing day, it became increasingly clear that in a few days the protective effect of the mirror barrier would completely disappear, and then monsters would rush into the royal capital like a broken dam. The soldiers forced to oppose them would become exhausted, and then everyone would be surprised that Mariel does not show her power, even in such a direct situation. And why she did not appear. No matter how much she prayed, she would not be able to resolve this situation. And the life and wealth she had created over the past year would crumble before her eyes. The neighboring states of Adalis also could not ignore the monsters, but they would not help the royal capital for free. At the moment when the land and the hearts of the people fall into despair, King Rolet will appear again and most likely demand the peace in return. Then he would proclaim himself the hand of salvation and regarding who brought destruction to this nation. That panic, anger, and distrust would turn precisely against Prince Arthur. He knew this well, and just the thoughts about it began to drive him insane and made him unwell. Now he began to regret his decisions and thought that if he had known earlier who she really was, he would never have done this and resorted to such extreme measures, but now the roles had completely changed. In addition, he was even more frightened by the voice in his head that said he could do nothing. If he confessed everything, people would get angry and turn against him, and if he started to justify himself, it would only intensify Reload's anger. He felt the lion's fangs near his throat and knew that all he could do was writhe in fear until those fangs pierced him. He felt like a rat in a cage, and even his large castle began to seem like a prison. Just this morning he was smiling because the plan was going smoothly, and he wanted all of this to be just a dream. He knew that all this was really happening to him, and there was little time left because when the monster attacks began, there would be no way back, so before that he had to find a way to protect himself. He wanted to ask for help from other countries, but it was impossible because there was not a single one that would help someone who was being watched. He thought about killing Reload, but quickly rejected this idea because he realized that even if successful, it would lead to a full-scale war. It was then that another idea came to his mind. If he managed to find Myra before her brother, he hoped he could convince her to establish a barrier around the capital, and if he treated her correctly, King Reload might forgive him and give him a second chance. He decided to stick to this idea for now and was determined not to let anyone break his spirit. He still thought to himself that everything belonged only to him, and he intended to keep it that way. And a few minutes later, meeting a priest, he advised him to immediately chase after Reload because the prince must care for the country, not for himself. And he should have tried to tell this to as many people as possible. This was the best way out for a man in his position. This was not what Arthur wanted to hear, and he got worked up, doubting whether the other even understood the situation they were in. He reminded him that if he fell, the involvement of the priests in all this would also become known. And then he would not be able to become the high priest, as he wanted. But the priest just laughed and told him that from the beginning it was all about him. Arthur was shocked when he heard that he did not care whether he became the high priest, because there had been no saint in the temple for over 80 years, and they had no power. Moreover, since the title was inherited by his brother, he had always been just a priest. He hoped that getting to know Arthur would bring some adventure, but everything fell apart in just 10 days. The new Saint Tess was useless, and the prince had no real support at all. He mocked him even more, saying that he was just a fool sinking the whole country, playing commander. He laughed in his face and told him that although he always considered himself smart and able to control everything, in the end. And he just behaved like an idiot while Arthur shouted at him and accused him of planning all along to hide behind his back. But Mary interrupted everyone and said that she was not as incompetent as they thought. She held a protective amulet named Tidden in her hand and told the prince that after great effort she managed to make one. She really wanted to show it to him because she followed his instructions and believed that thanks to this she was a true saint. However, Arthur did not care, and he also shouted at her because first, she herself put him in this situation by saying too much in front of the king and accused her of wasting time making such amulets. He told her to her face that if she could not set up a barrier now, then she was nothing more than a useless burden without value, and she was simply stunned by these words. It was then that his valet informed him that Mary actually did not come from a noble family. During the shelter inspection, it was discovered that she had not been taken in for 10 years. She was taken when she was just born, and this whole story was just a publicity stunt by Count Dilo, who sought the honor of restoring that very blood test. The priests began to laugh and looked at them condescendingly, but old Maria refused to believe that it was true. She began to cry and said that the Count himself said that she was the child of his brother and they would take care of her. She asked Arthur to just forget about the orphanage for now and reminded him that he had already said, if she listened to him, he would give her a bright life forever. The irritated prince told her to shut up because unlike influential people, she had a lower status, and the priest just watched with pleasure. Make him suffer greatly, and then. He noticed that this was exactly why he was so afraid of Myra. The prince was shocked to hear this from the priest. Although Myra had an incomprehensible power, she was not from this country, and this thought always frightened the prince. He continued to mock Arthur, saying that he was just a scared boy trying to take control of everything, and this made the prince even angrier. And he urged him to say it again, while Muriel, on the contrary, was still just clinging to him, asking if he could finally see her as a saint and if he could stay there. Arthur shouted at her again that she had no right even to think about such a thing, because since she came, she had done nothing and was completely useless. Her heart was broken and she felt anger. She asked him again if he himself had done anything significant. The monsters behind their walls will not leave just because he shouted at them. This completely caught him by surprise, because deep down he knew that she was telling the truth at that moment. He recalled how King Rollet said that this role did not suit him, and later he began to lose his mind, thinking that literally everything and everyone was rising against him. He loudly ordered the royal guard to be on alert. He ran to his room and locked himself in. He was all sweaty and did not know what to do next. But he still kept telling himself that he was not guilty, and called one of his men, who reported that the number of monsters around the capital was rapidly increasing, and the castle guards could no longer cope on their own. So he asked the prince to think about it, and listen to King Idas if they wanted any hope of survival. But Arthur did not care, and he ordered him only to protect him and nothing more. Every step scared him for his life, and he thought that if his brother and mother were nearby, everything would be different. People began to ask why King Idas came to the capital, and why the saint had not appeared yet. When they could clearly see monsters even through the windows, they looked for answers in the tracks. However, Arthur remained alone because he did not have the strength to meet with people. But suddenly he felt that everything had quieted down. A woman came to him and said that she considered it an honor to search for King Arthur from Roylitis. She explained that during her journey to the Northern Temple, she heard about the situation in which the royal capital now found itself. To help them, she had already dealt with every monster outside the walls and sent them back to the earth with her purifying power. Arthur could not believe what he heard and was shocked. He thanked her for her efforts and explained that now he was only the heir to the throne, not the king. She quickly apologized for the assumption and told him that she had heard he would soon become the king of this land. She then formally introduced herself as Ariano, the walking saint, and said that she did not need position or fame because she felt great joy serving the true king with the power given to her. As soon as he heard this, Arthur felt that this was true divine providence, and when she appeared, a huge burden of tension lifted from his shoulders. He asked her if she was ready to stay close and help this great nation with her strength. She smiled ominously and promised to obey every one of his commands, but he had no idea. She was like a snake staring at him before completely devouring him. The scene finally returned to Mura, who was trying to gather non-poisonous fruits that they could eat on the way. But most of them were toxic. Raoul gave her advice and said that when she harvests, she should definitely take from the titmouse, and she thanked him for teaching her how to survive in the forest. At the same time, she felt that the scent of her barrier was beginning to weaken. Since that was the case, you suggested they hurry, because the night would soon catch up with them too, and after that she went ahead. Later they arrived in the city to replenish supplies, and she noticed it at the market. Stores began to run out of goods because almost everyone was stocking up, and everything was in chaos, which was not surprising since monsters were approaching, and the holy Medinas turned out to be fake. There was also a pond in the city, which she liked very much, a rare place for rest, on whose supplies many other traders also relied. Then she took out a map, and after they replenished supplies and rested, they planned to head to the border via a mountain trail. Meanwhile, Ro thought that since the fearless pursuers no longer knew their exact location, they would not do anything tricky. But at the same time, hiding in the forest, they did not see any movements on the other side. Myra asked him if he thought those men had given up on them, and he agreed that it seemed so, but the chance of meeting them was still high, so they needed to stay as inconspicuous as possible. And just behave like traveling adventurers, she was interested in one more thing. She asked him if he knew anything about those previously hired mages. He explained to her that many mages sell their services, but some only take individual orders and do not have their own shop. At that moment, a mysterious woman approached them and called Ro. It seemed she knew him before and was surprised that he was actually spending time with a girl now, which rarely happened. Roll simply told her to leave the girl alone because she starts using explosive magic when surprised. They just ignored her and moved on, and Mura noted that the magic was not that powerful. It mostly depended on the strength and weaknesses of the person, so he should not underestimate how much endurance it takes. Raul appreciated her training and thought that if that was the case, then the new Holy Medinas must be like that too. Her power could be enormous, but not limitless. Besides, they also had to worry about the soldiers of Direlo, because he did not know what information they had about Mura. They could recognize her by face, not just by height, and Mura's strength remained a mystery, because he did not know how much she could endure when there were more people and monsters. In any case, he decided to protect her and take her to the border, as he had promised. But as they walked by, it turned out that the people of Direlo were still following them and watching every move from the shadows. Later in the evening, they went to the tavern to spend the night, and before going to their rooms, Mura took his hand and went to the tavern, and wished him good night, which surprised him a little. After that she went to the room, lay down on the bed, and thought that it had been 5 days since she last slept in a bed. She then wondered why those men were chasing her, and assumed that it might be connected to the strange events currently happening in the capital. Besides, she still felt guilty for not telling Roll everything earlier, especially after she noticed how much he cared for her since they found out about those pursuers in the previous town. At that moment, a shadow appeared behind her door, and within a few moments, it set fire to the door handle. People shouted that someone had set fire near one of the rooms, and Raul quickly went to check, but the door was charred and jammed, and no one was there. No one could open it, but he opened it and went in to check on Myra to see if she was okay. She was lying on the bed, and he closed the door and ran to see if something had happened to her. He wondered if the direless men had already caught up with them. But she woke up after resting and asked him if it was already morning. He sat on a chair, sighed with relief, and was glad that she was completely fine. When he told her what had happened outside, she said that she had placed a barrier on the door of her room and changed its properties so that only Raul and he could pass through it. This explained why only he could open the door, and she guessed that the lock was broken because of this. Raul was surprised to see how clever and adaptable she was, and began to understand why she was not afraid, even though only the princess, who was just like her, and her maid had set out on this journey. He asked her if her barrier was active in his room as well. But she forgot to inform the person responsible for this, which was a condition for activating the barrier, so she apologized to him. He just smiled and assured her that everything was fine, because ultimately only safety mattered. Returning to this attempt, Ayaro was supposed to kidnap her. He noted that there were many strange moments. If they really planned a kidnapping during the arrest, they would have acted much more decisively. Instead, the attempt looked half-hearted. It could have been just a random robbery, not the work of the Daro people, but that seemed unlikely. So he concluded that the one who was chasing her really got into her room. He decided to leave the city immediately and asked her to pack her things. She said that this clarified one thing. She still felt magic in the keyhole, so that meant there was a mage here. And they most likely tried to open the lock with magic. The barrier was still standing and protecting her. He asked her if she had any idea who the mage was, and she was there. She replied that she did not know, but she could still track them by that magical trail, as if pulling a thread. She suggested moving faster, because she wanted to catch up with them before they left, and make them pay for damaging the door. Raul just smiled and agreed that they should leave. After some time, Dairo's people finally reached the tavern, and they had no idea what had happened, because everyone said that a fire had started and some drunk set the tavern on fire. One of them felt that something was wrong, so he decided to flush out everyone who tried to leave the tavern. Meanwhile, the monsters also began to act, and the lure monster in the form of an insect flew across the sky. Then a flashback was shown about how Myra and Chul had just left the royal capital. Myra doubted why they needed a guard, because she could simply cast a protective barrier, protect herself, and without rushing, easily and quickly reach Ida. Chul noted that Myra had no real combat experience, and if they were ambushed on the way, they might not have time to react. She even admitted that she herself was not strong enough, and besides, it was impossible to predict the physical strain from changing barriers, powers, and intervals. Mura apologized for all this trouble, but Chul assured her that it was not her fault. It was all because of those ungrateful fools who had driven her out of the country. However, Myra, being a gentle person, said that blaming others would not help them. Returning to the present time, she registered, took the magical path, and reached its end. It was the same woman they had recently encountered. She pretended as if she remembered nothing. She asked them why they had come to her. Raul told her to confess everything she had planned in her mind and asked her not to think about escape, because they would be able to track her by magical traces. The women laughed upon hearing that they could see magical traces and told him that he had truly become the one who bluffs now. Raul immediately got to the point and suggested that the door handle had probably warped from the heat because she had overstrained herself. But she still pretended that she did not understand at all what it was about. So Myra showed her one of her spells and said that if she really wanted proof from them that it was indeed her who did it, she could provide plenty. As soon as the woman saw this, she was shocked because she could not believe that such a child could use advanced barrier magic and realized that they really could find traces of magic. But instead of threatening her or anything, Myra simply asked why she was trying to target her. She could understand that the woman hated her, and that was normal, but she wanted her to direct her anger only at her and not scare others or damage their property. The women did not know how to respond to this and explained that she did not even know who she was and in fact blamed Raul for everything. He simply ignored her that time when she came to say hello, so she decided to tease him a little. She also mentioned that some sinister soldiers were wandering nearby, and they annoyed her a lot by looking at her and interrogating her. This immediately caught Raul's attention. She added that if there was a commotion, they would come right away, so she just wanted to survive what she had done. At first, she only wanted to play with the lock to make noise, but it was already open, so she overdid it and burned the lock. Ro, on the other hand, began to look around to check if someone was following them. Mura asked her to apologize to the owner and compensate for the door, to which she did not object at all. But when she looked at the two of them, it became clear that Raul was too tense today, and as soon as she mentioned Diallo, they both reacted and became worried. She began to piece everything together and wondered if the girl in front of her was the same one everyone was talking about, but even if she was a fake saint, that did not explain how she could use magical detection in the barrier, so she decided to ask her directly. And Muro whether she really was a false saint. In response, she simply gestured for her to be silent and asked her not to tell anyone. The woman was surprised because she did not expect such an answer at all and could not help but find it very cute. When they were about to leave, she stopped them and advised not to go through the city but to use the bypass roads behind her. She also told them about these rumors and said that the soldiers of Direlos were searching for the false saint because of the poor but brave true Saint Meryl, who silently suffered because of her. And they wanted to save her from the curse that the false Saint Mura had placed. What started as a small rumor spread throughout the country, and now all recent accidents and illnesses were attributed to Mura. The authorities wanted to expose her sins before the prince and the true saint to make things right, and moreover, the count received permission from the prince himself to detain her, which made their case plausible. Adventurers and townsfolk pretended for the reward because Muru was effectively declared wanted, and this left her completely stunned. Roll was surprised that she shared such useful information with them and asked for nothing in return. But it was then that the tireless soldiers caught up with them and ordered them not to move. But before they could do anything, Myra and the women quickly used magic and knocked them to the ground. Roll took the opportunity and grabbed Myra to escape. But before leaving, she thanked the women for their help, promised that they would meet again, waved goodbye to both of them, and the soldiers slowly got up and did not know where the girl had gone. She told them that they were late because the one they were trying to catch had already escaped. Meanwhile, Roll and Myra decided to leave the city and take the first plane since my time. The mountains also became dangerous because the soldiers had mountain horses trained to move very quickly, and in the cities, one could never be sure whom to trust anymore. Ahead were fields and villages, and a little further they reached the main road, and he knew that the soldiers would quickly catch up if they moved straight, so he decided to narrow their direction by this path. Just then soldiers on horses approached, shouting to aim for the limbs and took them alive, while Roll quickly drew his sword, ready to defend Myra. He told her to wait for his signal, but Myra suddenly noticed that something was approaching them. A carriage rushed right in front of them and stunned everyone. It turned out that a monster resembling an insect sneaked in and flew right over them. The soldiers could not believe their eyes, so everyone ran away, and one of their horses got scared and he fell off the saddle. Mura asked him if it was part of his plan, but he did not expect it at all. The monster seemed to circle around and look for something, but they did not have to find out. Rao quickly grabbed the soldier's horse and led Mura away. There were many people in front of them who were also fleeing from the monsters. He guessed that the caravan probably hired guards, so the monster targeted them. Because of the number of monsters and the size of the one leading them, he was sure that even the local adventurers would notice and everyone would rush there, but still not everyone would make it in time. Moreover, now that Dairos's soldiers all fled and did not pursue them, he decided it was the perfect chance to quickly reach the border, because if the countryside was filled with evacuees, it would be impossible to pass unnoticed. Myra wanted to help those who were fleeing to save themselves, but then she heard them say it was all because of her. Because of the false Saint Mura, since she caused this disaster for them, and it shocked her. But Ralph shouted and told her that he would. He was not going to retreat from his duty. He had to protect her, and although he did not have the strength to change the situation and save everyone who asked for help, he decided without hesitation to protect her. And that was the most important thing for him. He did not care if it contradicted her beliefs, he just wanted her to understand it. When he recalled the faith of the saint, Myra pondered what exactly she believed in. She promised her mother to become such a saint who would ease people's troubles as much as possible. On one hand there was that, and on the other, the same people she had sworn to protect were now against her, blaming her for all their problems and saying they no longer wanted her help. While she was deep in thought, the monster almost attacked a man, and at that moment she jumped off the horse and protected them by creating a barrier around them. Rael stopped and did not even get angry at her. He just smiled because he already understood the burden she, as a saint, always carried. The horde of monsters diverted attention from the people and focused only on the two of them, and Rael also prepared to join Nur. Now they could either destroy all the monsters or complete the evacuation before reinforcements arrived. In any case, he drew his sword and was ready to stand his ground. The monster began attacking them and cut down everyone who crossed its path. He took on the task of reducing their number somewhat and asked Myra to protect everyone else from the monster's attacks with her magic, to which she agreed. But the big one constantly spawned more monsters, and she realized that something had to be done about it because her usual cleansing would not work against such a creature. She was afraid she wouldn't last long because she had no combat experience, so she decided to act fully and try to finish it with one strike. She made a barrier around him and locked him inside. Then she released all her cleansing power inside that barrier and began to squeeze it tighter and tighter. She put all her strength into a powerful explosion and finally destroyed the main monster. The force of the strike lit up the entire sky, and it was visible all the way to the city. When she fell from exhaustion, Raoul caught her in his arms. Even he was shocked at how powerful the echo of her attack was. It was beyond all measures. The villagers stood before her. Also was impressed to see what she had just done. She was simply glad that everyone was safe, while thinking that she had actually carried this anger inside her for a long time. Meanwhile, not far away lived a man named Jater with 2 children, and they were frightened to see that bright light in the sky. He assured them that everything was fine and decided to check himself because he suspected he knew what that bright light was. Later, the townspeople were shocked to learn that one girl had destroyed a disaster-class monster in an instant. They believed that it was a miracle and said that no magic could possess such power. The children called her Saint, and the guards wondered where she had ended up now. It turned out she was resting in a little hut, and when she woke up, she did not know where she was and began to look around. Roll came in and was glad to see that she had finally woken up. He joked, asking if she had seen good dreams on that straw bed. She still looked confused, but at first wanted to freshen up. After she freshened up, he explained to her that they were now in a corner of the village where a few people had allowed them to use the hut, and that she had already rested for 3 days. She apologized to him for running out like that, and although he tried to stop her, she dragged him into a fight. He assured her that everything was fine and asked if she still felt any pain or discomfort. She replied that she now felt good, and suggested that all this fatigue must have been the price for using such enormous power. But now she was not tired at all. On the contrary, her strength was growing. He also told her that the people she saved had gathered everything they could and set off for the city. As far as he could see, there were no serious injuries, although it was strange considering the scale of the monster's attack. Myra rejoiced and asked if there was any bad news. He confirmed that there was, and it turned out that he had lost his equipment. He dropped it when they were standing opposite the Dioro's soldiers, and now it was lost in the chaos. As for the bag she was carrying, it also tore when she used a spell and blew up the monster, in other words. They were now completely without money. As they were thinking about what to do next, she heard voices from outside, and everyone wanted to meet the saint who saved their lives and thank him. He informed her that those people had been asking to see her for 3 days. When he was about to leave all those people and leave them to their fate, her quick decision changed his mind, and she saved many lives. He believed that she deserved all the praise she was now receiving from them. However, she fell silent for a moment, and the voices of the people grew louder. She said that she was not as indifferent as he thought. In fact, she admitted that she was still angry at all of them. Although she had done so much for them, they turned away from her in an instant, and she could not forgive them for that. Her role as a saint was not limited to just setting up barriers. She had to confront the fears that had taken root in Roy Dallas over the last 800 years to find true peace. She was a saint who lived for the people and was loved in return. For her, who rarely left her castle, this was the first duty in the role of a saint. Although she did not know how she would do it, she still approached it with pride and wanted to respond to the warm reception of the people. With her sense of pride and the devotion she had nurtured over the past year, everything was going well for her until the prince called her a fake saint. Despite the anxiety, she pulled herself together and argued back. She endured everything that people threw at her. If the plan was simply to drive her out, she did not want to leave chaos behind, and since she had no counterargument, she understood that people would naturally blame only her, and she wanted to believe that it was not their fault. But over time, she began to think about what the past year was for. People did not doubt the prince's words and offended her by spreading rumors. Completely forgetting everything she had done for them, she kept telling herself that she should not blame people. But they only made her life more difficult, and when she found out that the new Tess was quickly accepted here, she wondered if all this happened to her just because she was a foreigner. That is why, when it was necessary to save people and she was on horseback, she hesitated for a moment and almost abandoned them just like Ra. At that moment she realized that if she did not help them, she would not be able to fulfill her duties and would feel betrayed by her own expectations. But then Ra interrupted her and said that literally everyone behaves like that. It was natural to be upset when their ideals and determination were shaken. And it was completely normal, because after all she was just a human too. He believed that Myra was truly special, and unlike that other saint, even when that nation betrayed her, she did not abandon her ideals and remained faithful to them. She always did the right thing, and that is why he gradually began to idealize her. He sat next to her and at first apologized if she did not like what he was going to say, because he simply did not yet know about the true test of the saint. She told him not to worry about it, and in fact she was grateful for his thoughts because they made sense and cheered her up a little. Then he asked her what she wanted to do now. He wanted to know everything that she wanted or did not want to do next. Considering that she had just woken up, she said that she did not want to rush and would like to rest a little. She was still determined to help and save people. She had a feeling that the remnants of her barrier, which still held around the royal capital, would disappear before another one even appeared. Since the capital had already announced that a new true saint had been found, she removed her barrier from there, but seeing that the new saint had not established their barrier, she became worried about the people in the capital. She suspected that the barrier was absent because Saint Muriel either lacked energy or could not use it, but if they just stood still and did nothing, many people would die before her brother could do anything. Having seen with her own eyes how monsters attacked people, she could already imagine how destruction would engulf the entire country as soon as her barrier disappeared. At first, she thought it was better to leave everything to her brother, but now, knowing what danger this situation posed, she could not just go home and do nothing. She did not want to accept that she would so easily lose everything. She felt that she had to protect everyone, but then she saw that Rull was just smiling at her, and she became very nervous, saying that she also understood that such words were simply cruel. Earlier, when he told her how sharply people reacted to the news about the false saint, she realized that her silence then caused more anxiety than she had imagined. However, she was too hasty in her conclusions and clearly understood that he probably thought she was stupid. However, he simply stood up and told her that if she felt that way, then the two of them should already go and help everyone. He suggested that they finally reveal their true selves and stand with dignity, showing what the Holy Itis Kingdom really was. Until then, she prioritized returning home and avoided all conflicts, but now he believed that if she truly wanted to help everyone, she no longer needed to hide. She should not allow this to end without fulfilling her duty, and she had to achieve her goals by her own will. If there were ever chains that held her back, he promised to break them himself. In other words, now she had a second chance at life in this country. The second act of the story was to save Loiterus. She said she had long lost contact with her brother and was sure that he was looking for her right now. Moreover, there was Tull who had gone ahead alone. Raoul replied that he had been thinking about it for some time, and although he could not confirm it definitively, he believed that Tsuihou was completely safe and promised to explain why later. Her brother suggested she take the name Mura from Ida's and save the people so that the word would spread, and he could peacefully know that she was safe. But she was still not sure that she should act that way, because people wanted Marielle to be the true saint, since she was from this country. However, Raoul reminded her that the king personally called her to help this country, and if anyone considered it a burden, then the responsibility lay solely with King Loigeristu. But he also understood that not everyone was so reasonable, and there would be people who would continue to blame her or try to manipulate. To take care of them, he promised to be her sword. He promised to protect her at every step of this path. She was shocked to hear this and asked him why he was ready to go so far for her. He replied that he felt the same as she did and wanted to act, not pretend that nothing could be changed. Moreover, he had to ensure her safety until they reached the border and did not want anyone to die. He would not allow that while he was here. He also told her that it was perfectly normal to trust her brother so much, and she could continue to feel that way, even if she ever regretted the choice she considered right. Just as she believed in her brother, Raoul also believed in her true nature. She fell silent for a moment, deeply thoughtful. After a few minutes, the people near the house guessed that Saint Tess was resting now, so they decided to simply return. At that moment the door opened, and she finally came outside. She looked at Raoul, and he just smiled. So she showed the true color of her hair and confidently introduced herself. As the third princess of the kingdom of Itis, Saint Tess Mura. Some time passed, and the news of Myra's return spread throughout the country. The woman in black behaved like a friend and ordered the children on the streets to continue spreading the rumor that Myra did not need any curses or tricks. She knew advanced barrier magic and could use it with just one finger. But there were those who stubbornly did not believe her, and even when she saved them from monsters, they said it was her illusion again and would not be fooled anymore. She simply smiled and said she was glad to see that no one heard them. She also promised that if the monsters appeared again, she would come to their aid every time. Her adventure continued. She went from place to place and helped everyone she met to destroy monsters. People began to think differently, and this was noticeable in the lively cities. One man believed that she was just trying again to steal Muriel's glory. Someone claimed that Muriel did not even show herself to them, hiding behind illness. Count Deloc and Arthur also admitted that she could not reveal her powers, and the man accused Myra, saying it was her curse. Another questioned whether she could have defeated that giant monster if she was supposedly fake. The man insisted that it was all just an illusion created by her. Others did not speak with him and simply left, saying they saw it with their own eyes when Myra rushed to help people against that monster. Meanwhile, in an alley, two men overheard everything people were saying about her, and it became clear that the rumors in the city had completely changed, so they decided to immediately report this to Lord Riliad. Even those who were previously against her began to change their minds and treated her with the respect she deserved. One night, when they were camping in the forest, she realized that she had already gotten used to the hikes and battles, learned to control her powers without significant consequences, and the barriers around the towns and villages they passed through remained intact. She was also glad to see that, although many villages and towns were attacked by monsters, they were still lively and resilient, and she understood that people can be very strong when they have something to protect. Ross said it was mainly because she came to this country, and she replied that she was just drawing away monsters and toxic miasma. The very fact that the country of Loidar had endured 80 long years without a priest already deserved respect, and although fear had taken root in the people, it was not the only thing there. However, Roll did not feel this and believed that life had not changed at all over the past year. Everything remained the same because this country was cursed, and nothing had changed since his grandfather's time. But he knew that, curse or not, they had to move on because they were born here, and whether a false saint or not, their actions did not change because of that. At the same time, he assumed it was only a matter of time before people recognized the deception of the royal family. As soon as Myra returns home, risky actions of Arthur will lead to loss of trust, which has not been seen in the last 80 years, and he only hoped that after this there would remain at least some support to keep the country under the monarchy. She added that she also had such a premonition, and it was about Arthur's half-brother, the second Prince Jader. Roll asked her if the second prince was also in the castle, but she did not know and only heard that before her arrival, he had to go to the village. Although she had never met him, she wished for him to return to this country. The next morning, when they were gathering their things, Myra felt that something crossed the detection barrier. 4 children approached them. It seemed they were lost. She introduced herself as the princess of the kingdom of Ida and asked if she could help them with anything. As soon as they heard that she was a princess, their eyes lit up, and they asked her to go with them to the village because there were wounded people who needed help. She assured them that now everything would be fine and agreed to go with them. On the way, they explained that in their village there were no adults, only themselves. A wounded person came to them from outside, and they did not know how to take care of them themselves, so they split up to find someone who could help. Roll praised them, saying that they were doing well, although they were still children, and Myra asked if they had been alone all this time. The answer was that they had not been alone all the time, and just recently Jader had been with them. They had just been mentioned, and Jader finally caught up with them and was glad to see that everyone was safe. Mura and Rawl were shocked when they saw that the person in front of them was actually Jader, the second prince of Loidara, and they wondered what exactly he was doing here. He immediately recognized Mura as the saint who walked around helping people. He said that it was a great honor for him to finally meet her, immediately got down to business, and asked for her hand and consent to marriage. But suddenly he fell face down right in front of them, and they both remained completely bewildered. Later they all returned to the village, and even more children were glad that Jader had returned safely. Although his body was still trembling from weakness, he nevertheless introduced Myra to everyone as the third princess of Idas and ordered them to properly welcome her. He also told them that after she healed the wounded, they would need to discuss one matter, so lunch would be earlier as soon as they dealt with it. In the house, she treated the wounds of the older man and advised him to rest a little because he would need time to regain his strength. The old man thanked her. The whole Jader was simply happy that everything turned out wonderfully. Later he spoke privately with Myra and Roll and first showed them the royal ring he had with him. Although they did not really doubt him, this already proved that he was indeed the second prince. Then he added that he fully understood their situation. Although she was unfairly accused, she continued to selflessly serve the kingdom. Regarding the situation with the monsters, achieving cooperation from other countries was still difficult, so they would have to deal with it on their own, and chaos could worsen when the actions of his brothers became known. When it happened, he was ready to rush into the thick of events, although in reality, he had no way to control the chaos and protect the people. But still, it was his duty, because he was born into the royal family, and he also did not want to waste the efforts of others. He knelt before her, and as the second prince of this kingdom, sincerely apologized for his brother's actions and wholeheartedly thanked her for what she had done to protect the people of this state. Although she had every right not to do so, she asked him to raise his head and said that it was not his fault at all. Moreover, it was enough for her just to know that he felt that way, and as for fighting the monsters, she assured him that it was only her selfish desire. However, since they met, she was interested in one thing, and she asked him what that proposal in the forest was about. Hazure looked back as if he himself was a little puzzled, and then explained that he just thought it might stabilize the relations of their country and bring good news to their citizens. She apologized to him and explained that as a princess she cannot decide on her own, and the final decision can only be made by her brother, the king. He fully understood this and did not pursue the topic further, which surprised both of them a little. He then changed the subject, and although he understood that they were both busy, he did not want them to leave without a proper farewell. So if they did not mind, he asked permission to host them as much as he could. They saw nothing wrong with staying a little, so they accepted his invitation, and she also wanted to learn more about this village. Later, all the children prepared food for the guests from what they gathered in the forest. It turned out that when the people of this village were forced to flee due to a monster attack, these children were left behind. Hazure happened to pass by this village, saw the children, and decided to stay to help the abandoned children survive by sharing his knowledge with them, and his mother also came here for recovery. Roll noted that the two of them had already driven all the monsters from this area by the night watch. And Jader was glad to hear this, because now they could finally call the people of this village back. The children were very happy as soon as they heard that they could live with their parents again. The old man who had been there earlier also came out and offered to go and deliver the news himself. Jader asked him if he felt well now, and he replied that he could not just lie in bed while the children worked hard. He also said that when the attack happened, he was just carrying his things to evacuate, but the guards fled, and as a result he lost everything, so now he was completely without anything. Roll could hardly believe it, and the old man said they were lucky because the monsters did not go deep into the village, otherwise the children and the prince could also have been in trouble. Meanwhile, Myra remembered that not long ago she and Roll had talked about how it might be difficult for her to constantly place barriers everywhere they go. He noted that even if they somehow managed to filter them a little, managing her endurance and preparing to choose the route would take a lot of time by itself. Moreover, when there were barriers of different shapes and sizes nearby, the differences in their detection were not checked. Returning to the present, she apologized to the old man for being late, and he assured her that she need not worry. Besides, they lacked people. Several guards in the village were tired and could not even watch the roads, and for some reason the private soldiers of Darrow had retreated. He asked if they had any idea what was happening in the capital, and Rolls said that the outskirts were still blocked by landslides, so they also could not get there. One could go around, but it was easier to break through directly. Jader, feeling this, thought to himself that if he had been faster, everything could have been different. Later, it was time to say goodbye, and she said that she was happy that after a long break, she was able to sit at one table with so many people. Jader also thanked her for helping him so much, but then she looked at Raul, was not sure about it, and he nodded. So she asked them to live with them for a while. Jader and the children were a little surprised, and she explained that searching for monsters while constantly traveling has its limits, so for some time they had thought they needed a base where they could always return and rest. This village was conveniently located for scouting around the barriers in search of monsters. Although people would eventually return to the village, for now the residents needed every bit of help from these two, and when only the two of them were nearby, she assured that they had the strength of 100. And they would continue to help them. The children were very happy to learn that both would join. The first thing they thought was that they would be able to hunt a lot and cultivate the land. Of course, the final decision was in the hands of Jader, and she asked him if he minded. He did not object and allowed them to stay, so Myra quickly tied her hair and enthusiastically began to arrange a place for herself as a resident. Meanwhile, Raul seemed to be going somewhere alone, so Jader asked where he was going, and Raul replied that he first had to stop by the smithy to fix his sword. It was then that Jader called him Prince Roll, and it shocked him. He already knew that this rich chestnut-red hair was a symbol of royal power. His symbol was the ring he had shown them earlier, and he asked him so they could talk for a moment. They sat together, and he first apologized to him for being so sudden, explaining that he did not intend to interfere or interrogate. He also asked him to pretend he had not heard this if he planned to leave the position, and said that he was actually under house arrest because of a visit to his mother. Even under house arrest, he was allowed some movement. His mother was also safe, but he could not return to the capital, and when his father fell ill, he resigned. He quickly understood his elder brother's plans because he had heard rumors that they wanted to make Jader the next king. He did not even want to be king because he believed his tendency to self-sacrifice was not suitable for a ruler and decided not to cause conflict, as the throne belonged to the first prince and it was his birthright. He fully understood this, but soon he felt that something strange was happening in the kingdom. He asked his guards to ensure his mother's safety and set out for the capital. During this, he came across the village where they were now. He also realized that logically, as the second prince, he had to give the children to someone else and fulfill his duty. However, he acted selfishly and decided to take care of the children himself. Shortly after that, Muru was expelled and mistakenly accused of being a false saint. But a few days ago, when he went to scout that bright light in the sky, at that moment he could have simply returned to the capital, and the children could have easily defended themselves until the people returned to the village, but he came back again. Due to his inattentiveness, he misprioritized and realized that when the father fell, the monarchy wavered, monsters filled the land, and Muru was left to fight alone. Meanwhile, he was delaying, so he thought that if he had returned to his castle earlier, everything could have turned out completely differently, and he felt partial guilt for what was happening. What is happening now to this country? He planned to go to the capital in the coming days, but he could not refuse Muru, who sincerely asked him to stay, and he did not want to use her as an excuse because he thought it would humiliate him. To avoid burdening them further, he decided to leave unnoticed before new conflicts arose. But Rose simply said that he already felt that something was wrong. In fact, it concerned not only him and Nurai, probably even the children guessed what was happening. Jader was completely confused. Although Raoul told him that the day was clear, he felt both comfortable and uncomfortable being there, so everyone else worried that his attempts to hide it were causing him stress. And Jader was simply shocked to hear that they were able to read it so easily. As for his feelings, Ro understood his guilt, but reminded him that the capital was closed and no one knew what was happening there. Until the situation is resolved, even the life of the second prince there is not guaranteed. Therefore, the request that he and Myra expressed was specifically for him, so that he would have a reason to stay here. Because they thought that if they tried to intervene directly, it would make him even more stubborn, and apparently, he was on the verge of such behavior now. He assured him that his time to take responsibility would come, and he and Myra would stand by to at least somewhat improve this country and pave the way for him. He thought that the second prince was actually very similar to Myra because she was also inconsistent. Because he was already ashamed that he was read like an open book. He decided to simply say and admit that he had always admired Saint Myra and secretly believed in her light. When he finally got the chance to meet her for the first time in the forest, he forgot about everything around and mechanically said everything he thought, thus looking ridiculous. For the first time in his life, he felt this. The reason why he later presented this as a political decision was that he simply thought it would be easier to handle, and she would not feel pressured. However, Raoul just raised his sword and walked away. Still confused, Jader asked him if they already knew about this too. And he simply replied that he would pretend as if he had never heard it from him. After a few days, life in the village finally began to return to normal, and a reason was needed to go to the capital. Raoul said that the story about the second Prince Jader going with Murat to save the heir to the throne Arthur sounded too perfect and could arouse suspicion, and most importantly, he reminded her that their main goal now was to escape. Davos was with his brother, King Reloid, but if she really wanted to go to the capital, he decided to accompany her. When he was asked to tell a story, he had a much simpler one. He showed her the ring he was hiding. She was stunned because it bore the sign of the divine wolf, which meant that he was actually from the royal family of the Lightide. He apologized for hiding it from her for so long and told that when he was little, King Ada visited his hometown Lidai, and then he met her for the first time. Although he hardly spoke to any of them, he only recalled that it was about 11 or 12 years ago. He overheard his father talking to the king. He said that Myro was a special saint, born for a special mission. He didn't really understand it because even now, he saw that she helped others not because it was her mission or that she was special. She did it simply because it was right. Even when she was in pain and could have easily not forgiven, she looked inside herself and honestly accepted her feelings. In this, Jader was actually similar to her. Although he had his own interests, he still tried sincerely to fulfill his duties. People also struggled hard in this situation, clinging to anything amid despair and fear just to survive. As for Arthur as a prince, and at the same time a citizen, Raoul was actually looking forward to how he would speak before the people instead of his brother-in-law and answer their questions. Holding the ring in his hand, he finally began to understand why she never directly accused Arthur. Despite what he had done to her, the thing was that she was exactly that kind of person. He told her that his country perished believing in a saint. A true saint who could make people suddenly betray everyone. Because of this, his entire people disappeared, and since then he lost faith in stability. When a person loses everything they believed in, they stop even trusting themselves, and that is exactly what happened to him, so he barely got by as an adventurer. Even when he helped others during missions, it only led to him hating himself. And that always annoyed him. He wanted to break it out of spite. But of course, it was not that simple, and over time he became so focused on survival that the desire for revenge completely disappeared. And then he met her. Since then, she seemed to enjoy the role of a saint and simply followed her feelings. And that also changed his perception. He always thought that saintly women were only of two kinds, good or bad. But when he saw that she was angry, laughing, preparing snacks, worried, and even handing out water, she reminded him that having such a saint was also quite natural. He also talked about this with Yader and now finally decided. He decided that as soon as he helps, if she reaches the border, he will return to Lide for some time. Although most of the territory was captured by monsters, he hoped he could do something to help his country. For a long time, he closed his eyes to everything around, so now he decided to take on the duties of the last surviving prince of his land. Mura was glad to hear that he had a clear goal in his head, but it was not that goal. He also said that he was glad he was able to meet her. She blushed and said that she was the one who should be grateful to him, but it seemed a bit early for last words, so let's leave it aside. She did not even know how to contact her brother, and he explained to her that it was much easier than she thought. While the two of them talked all night, she already knew in her heart what the next chapter would be. And that is why she was afraid even to talk about it. Every story has an end, and Raoul had already chosen his path. She only had to fix the situation in the capital. After this, what she had not even thought about happened. The next day, many wounded people came. While Jader was evacuating the wounded, Myro did everything possible to heal them. Raoul reminded her not to treat everyone at once, as then she would not be able to maintain her barriers. But now she had no other choice, so she strove to save as many people as possible. She tried to understand why it happened and what she missed, but at some point she had a thought she did not want to accept, so she kept telling herself not to think about unnecessary things. She ran up to another wounded man. He was from the capital, and you recognized her immediately. He apologized to her for not believing her when she was with them. And then he told her that the capital was destroyed. She was completely stunned. The scene shifted to the royal capital in memory, and the knights, by the prince's order, began stealing people's property because he said that corruption spoils human hearts. Since the wealth was tainted by corruption, it was decided to gather it in one place so that the new Saint Eliano could cleanse it. To prevent corruption from entering the capital, he ordered the guards to close it and prohibit entry and exit. There formed a real sect because of the new Saint Tessa, and Arthur summoned Dairo to himself and interrogated him. He generally thought that after the betrayal, he would be able to avoid the consequences. He announced that Dairo would be stripped of all titles and ordered the knights to imprison him for treason. Moreover, he ordered the disbandment of Darrow's private army, and if they resisted, to declare them traitors. Meanwhile, carts filled with grotesque corpses were being driven through the streets, and it was decided to cover the castle walls with them. People could not even breathe near those corpses when Eliano approached them and reminded them that monsters are decay itself. Thus, their deaths put an end to corruption, and that was why they had to be hanged. She believed that fear would grip these monsters, and they would disappear from the capital, frightened by their own death. She made up a bunch of nonsense, telling them that if miasma is a visible poison, then vice is an invisible poison that turns purity into a curse. The cleansing of corruption was only a temporary measure, because as long as its roots existed, miasmas and monsters continued to appear. And this was proof of why monsters never disappeared from this continent. She called herself a true saint who has real power, and said that none of them should be afraid to speak the truth. But when people began to talk about the problems they faced because the prince took all their money and closed the country, he announced that anyone who spoke out would be called a traitor, and even then there were fools who believed that Iliano and the prince were telling the truth and that he was doing it for everyone. But over time, even the soldiers who piled up the monster corpses began to fall ill. Arthur, at the very center of everything, was indifferent to his people and believed that if he listened to Iliano, the loyalists would become a unique people and be the first to overcome the poisonous fog, and then neither Ida nor the monsters would pose a threat. As long as Iliano was nearby, he was confident that everything would turn out perfectly, but suddenly he learned that she had disappeared. His people informed him that she was nowhere to be found, neither in the castle nor in the temple. There were no traces of her belongings, as if she had never been here. They had already gone too far, and they needed her to complete the cleansing. However, Arthur began to get irritated and ordered them to resolve this by human force, to immediately mobilize all soldiers and start by restoring the appearance of the building. He ordered that no citizen should find out that the saint had disappeared, but just then one of his men approached him. And the residents of the capital who had seen her formed an impression. They say she simply walked through the streets, said goodbye to the people of the capital, and then just went out through the gates and left. Arthur was shocked and could not even begin to understand what was happening. The people of the capital gathered in crowds near the castle and raised their voices against the prince, calling him a fraud for stealing their money and demanding the outer walls be opened. All the saints who came there were fake. They didn't even want to stay in this miserable place called the royal capital. Arthur didn't know what to do while people were telling how their families were quarreling and accusing each other of corruption. Meanwhile, some fainted from the stench of monster corpses. People were fed up with the corpses lying on the ground near the walls, and one of them decided to set them on fire himself, while others called him a traitor. When the citizens started arguing among themselves, Arthur just stood in shock and watched, still not understanding how it came to this. Suddenly, a colossal explosion tore around the royal capital, and as soon as he saw it, he began telling himself that it was not his fault. A shadow rushed through the streets, and it turned out to be a huge horde of monsters heading straight for the people, destroying everything that was in their way. People panicked and began barricading the castle doors to escape from the monsters. But on the other side, the knights closed the doors. They locked themselves inside and left everyone there to die. Panic broke out, people were pushing each other, saving their own lives, but deep down everyone knew it was in vain, and meanwhile Arthur's butler stood by the king's bed trying not to hear the cries for help from outside. And then, just like that, a horde of monsters captured the entire royal capital. Arthur used a secret underground passage and left the capital unnoticed. But when he looked back, the capital was already in ruins and a fire had started. The escape route he used dated from the era of conflict and was intended for the fall of the nation. However, he never thought he would have to use it someday. He could not understand how everything happened and why he had to suffer so much. He did not know where to flee now or what had happened to his father. Yet he simply no longer worried, because now everything was over. Looking around, he saw that the entire capital was in smoke, but noticed that no monster was pursuing him, and thought that the talisman he took for Muriel was truly helping him. He paid no attention, and for now decided to head to Tom and Teresa, hoping to get there before sunset.